All right, so we're diving into resilient futures, huh? This handbook's all about navigating global risks, and you're really honed in on chapter 5.
Yeah, adaptation and mitigation strategies.
It's like the core, right? Like, how do we actually deal with a world that's changing so fast?
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's not just theory. It's like practical steps for everybody, you know, individuals, families, whole communities.
Oh, so it's like a toolkit for building resilience on all those different levels.
Exactly. It breaks down how we adapt to the environmental changes we're already seeing, the things we can't ignore, and then how do we mitigate? Hit the brakes on the stuff we can control.
I'm with you. Let's start with that adaptation piece then. Section 5.1, environmental changes. What jumps out at you there?
Well, the handbook, it really emphasizes that adaptation, it's not giving up, it's getting smart, understanding the challenges, but finding ways to thrive despite them.
Like the example they give the Netherlands. Investing in all those flood defenses, water management systems, really reduce their flood costs.
Right. And it's not just your typical dikes and dams. They've incorporated nature too, you know, floodplains, wetlands, working with nature.
That's so interesting. So it's like a more holistic approach.
Precisely. And it's had all these unexpected benefits, like the restored wetlands. Now they're thriving ecosystems, more biodiversity, even attracting tourism.
So it's a win-win. It makes you think, could that work in other places facing floods?
Absolutely. The handbook really encourages thinking about local applications, like what are your challenges, right? And what solutions might fit your area.
That makes sense. And speaking of specific challenges, they dive into climate-resilient agriculture too. Weather patterns are all over the place, traditional farming's getting hit hard. Flexibility seems key.
It is. You can't just rely on one crop anymore or one growing season. Diversification, that's huge. Planting a variety of crops, you know, with different tolerances to heat, drought, pests.
Like hedging your bets.
Exactly. And it go beyond just what you plant. Water-efficient irrigation, drought-resistant varieties, even integrating livestock for better soil health, you know, more resilience.
It's a whole system, combining the old ways with the new science.
Right. And that actually leads us to another big one, energy efficiency.
Yeah, the handbook makes a point. This isn't just about being eco-friendly. It's about being prepared.
It is. Transitioning to renewables like solar, wind, that's not some hippie dream anymore. It's practical energy independence.
And they list things individuals can do too. Energy-efficient appliances, switching to LED lights, better insulation.
All that stuff adds up, makes a difference.
Now, this water resource management section, this goes way beyond just shorter showers.
It does. The handbook even suggests things like rainwater harvesting, gray water recycling. Have you ever looked into those?
Rainwater harvesting, yeah, I get that. Collecting it for later use. But gray water? What even is that?
So it's that gently used water from sinks, showers, laundry. Instead of going down the drain, you treat it, use it for other things like watering the garden, flushing toilets.
Wow, reusing water we normally waste. That's pretty amazing. Is that, like, realistic for normal people's homes, though?
It can be. The tech's gotten way better, more affordable, easier to use. Of course, depends on local rules, your specific house.
Right. Makes sense. But definitely something to look into, especially if water's scarce where you live.
For sure. And it all ties into this bigger theme, you know, community adaptation.
The handbook is big on that, huh? That whole resilient communities thing.
Yeah, like it's a safety net, building systems of support, sharing resources, local resilience plans, that kind of thing.
Takes a village, right?
Exactly. It's not just each person on their own. It's about coming together, leveraging everyone's strengths.
Social resilience alongside the physical stuff.
Absolutely. Powerful message in a world facing, well, everything it's facing. We're stronger together. Adaptation's a team sport.
It really is. You've given me a lot to think about. Adaptation, it's multifaceted. Ingenuity, collaboration, being open to new solutions.
Well said. And that sets us up perfectly for talking about those mitigation efforts. How do we actually reduce the risks we face? So let's shift gears a bit. Talk about those mitigation efforts, reducing risks. Section 5.2 in the handbook.
Perfect timing. Because after all that adaptation stuff, I'm thinking, how do we stop these problems before they happen?
That's the heart of mitigation, right? Getting at the root causes. And the handbook, it's very clear, cutting greenhouse gas emissions, that's mission critical.
Turning down the heat on the planet, so to speak.
Exactly. And what they stress is this isn't just on governments, big corporations. Individual actions, they matter a lot.
So it's not just about like signing petitions, voting for the right people. It's about our own lives, our own choices.
Exactly. They break it down into three main things. Energy efficiency at home, how we get around, and, you know, our buying habits, what we buy as consumers.
Okay, let's take those one by one. Energy efficiency, we touched on that with adaptation.
Yeah.
But for mitigation, how's it different?
Well, think of it this way. Every bit of electricity we don't use, that's electricity that doesn't need to be generated. Less emissions from power plants.
So even small stuff like the LEDs, energy efficient appliances, it adds up.
Oh, for sure. And it's not just the appliances themselves. Being aware of how we use energy, lights off when you leave a room, unplugging things you're not using.
Ugh, guilty as charged. My phone charger is always plugged in. Need to work on that.
We all have our little energy sins, right? The good news is, being more efficient, it often saves you money too.
True. That's a nice bonus. Okay, what about the transportation piece? That feels harder to change.
It can be, especially if you're in a place where everyone drives everywhere. But the handbook, it gives options, the obvious ones like walking, biking, public transport.
But those aren't always realistic.
Right, so then you've got things like carpooling, fuel-efficient vehicles if you have to drive.
And even if you can't ditch the car entirely, there are ways to optimize, right?
Exactly. Plan your routes so you're driving less. Avoid rush hour if you can. Even making sure your tires are properly inflated, that helps with fuel economy.
It's like being more mindful about it all.
Precisely. Now that last piece, the buying habits, this is where it gets interesting.
Because it's not just what we buy, it's how much, right?
Got it. The handbook, it encourages us to be more mindful consumers. Quality over quantity, things that last instead of disposable junk.
Like shifting our mindset from I want it now to do I even need this?
Exactly. And it ties into that whole circular economy idea, reducing waste, keeping things in use for as long as possible.
I'm seeing how it all connects. Consuming less waste, reusing, repairing stuff, all part of the same strategy.
You got it. And this brings us to another key part. Conserving resources.
Makes sense. If we're using less stuff, we need less of the resources to make that stuff in the first place.
Exactly. And the handbook, it highlights water conservation as a big one for individuals. Low-flow shower heads, faucets, those efficient appliances, again, even just being mindful of how much water we use.
It's easy to take water for granted, especially if you live somewhere where it seems plentiful.
It's a precious resource, though. And as climate change gets worse, water scarcity is becoming a bigger and bigger problem.
So it's not just about saving a few bucks on the water bill. It's about, the future, right? Having enough water for everyone.
Exactly. And all of this ties into this idea of ecosystem protection, super important for both adaptation and mitigation.
Now, that connection I'm curious about. How does protecting ecosystems help us mitigate risks?
Well, healthy ecosystems, they're crucial for regulating the climate. They absorb CO2, filter water, all these benefits.
So if we mess up those ecosystems, like deforestation, pollution, all that, we're actually making climate change worse.
Exactly. And that brings us to something a lot of people don't think about, carbon sequestration.
Now, that one sounds kind of technical.
It's basically capturing and storing CO2, so it doesn't go into the atmosphere. And the handbook, it talks about how forests are essential for this.
Right. Trees absorb CO2 stored in their wood, their roots.
Exactly. So protecting those forests, planting new trees, that's huge for increasing carbon sequestration.
So it's not just about emitting less CO2, it's also about helping nature suck up what's already there.
You got it. And it goes beyond just trees. How we manage the land, things like cover cropping, no-till farming, those can sequester carbon in the soil too.
So it's like helping the planet heal itself.
In a way, yeah. We're supporting those natural systems that regulate the climate, help mitigate those climate change impacts.
This is really fascinating stuff. Mitigation, it's just as complex as adaptation. It's about changing how we think, new technologies, and understanding how interconnected everything is.
Well said. And that actually leads us perfectly into our last section, sustainable living practices. How do we put all this into action in our everyday lives?
Okay, I gotta say, after all that mitigation talk, feeling inspired, but kind of overwhelmed too. So much we could do, but where do you even start?
That's where this last section comes in. 5.3, sustainable living practices. It's taking those big ideas and turning them into things we can actually do every day.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better. What kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, it starts with something we've already mentioned, waste reduction. It's not just a trend anymore, it's essential.
Yeah, it's more than just putting stuff in the recycling bin, right?
Right, more. The handbook, it talks about this hierarchy. Reducing what we buy in the first place, that's top of the list. Less stuff, less waste.
Makes sense. But what about all the stuff we already have? They talk about reuse, repair. Is that even realistic these days? With everything being so disposable?
It can be. It's about, Changing your mindset, seeing the potential in something old instead of just, oh, I need a new one.
I'm so guilty of that. Throwing things out when maybe I could have fixed them. Maybe it's time to, I don't know, learn some basic repair skills or something.
There's so much out there to help with that. Online resources, repair cafes, maker spaces, places where people can learn those skills, teach each other.
Oh, that's cool. Like bringing back that whole fixing things culture.
Exactly. And it all goes back to that resource conservation idea. Big theme in this section.
Right, right. We talked about water already. What other resources are we trying to save here?
Well, energy is a big one. Handbook talks about those energy saving habits. Using natural light, air drying your clothes instead of the dryer, unplugging things when you're not using them.
Oh man, that phantom energy drain, all those little lights on devices, even when they're off. Got to get better at that.
We all do, but it makes a difference over time.
It does. And it's not just the energy we use at home, right? They mentioned transportation too. How we get around, how much it impacts the environment.
Yeah, we talked about alternatives like walking, biking, public transport, but they also talk about how much we rely on cars.
Like maybe downsize to a more fuel-efficient car. Or go car-free entirely, if you can.
Exactly. Challenging those assumptions, finding options that fit your sustainability goals.
This whole sustainable living part, it's like a checklist, huh? For how to make better choices, like in every part of your life.
I like that way of putting it. And it gets to the point the handbook makes. Sustainability isn't about being deprived or sacrificing things you enjoy.
Right. It's about living better, but in a way that's good for the planet too.
Exactly. And often those sustainable choices, they have other benefits. Better health, less stress, stronger connections with your community.
So it's win-win for us and the planet.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to what Resilient Futures is all about. Building resilience is a journey, not a destination. It's about constantly learning, adapting, and making choices for a better future, for us and for the generations coming after us.
This whole deep dive, it's really been eye-opening. Like I have a whole new understanding of what it means to be prepared for whatever's coming next.
It's not about bunkers and stockpiles. It's about the right mindset, Sustainable practices, strong communities. That's how we weather the storms.
I'm walking away from this feeling hopeful, inspired, and ready to make some changes. Thank you for taking me through this. It's an incredible handbook.
My pleasure. The biggest thing to remember, every little step we take, it all adds up. It builds that more resilient future. So let's keep learning, keep adapting, keep building that better world.
And who knows, maybe this is just the start of our journey together. Plenty more deep dives to come.
Looking forward to it.